Bradley Fodchuk was a jumper. Not just for those few short years as a very young boy when this physical act was possible. He jumped throughout his entire time on this earth. For a human who spent 85% of his days in a wheelchair, Bradley executed brave, creative, and intrepid jumps across the trajectory of his spectacular and important life. Look to your left. Look to your right. Look in front and behind you. If Brad hadn't committed to such leaps, the we in this hall and beyond today wouldn't be as vibrant, as populous, or as better for having known and loved this boy who grew into an exceptional man. My name is Amos Fodchuk, next to Kyle, who is beside me today, and Dylan, whose life we also celebrated in this same space almost 31 years ago. We are Bradley's brothers. Our amazing wives, Joanne and Katy, are also with us today. They are Brad's sisters. Eli, Elsa, Evie, Emmett, Ansel. Today you will learn so much about your Uncle Bradley. You'll see how many people love him and the effect that his love has had on you and your future. And that any of us are even here today is the result of Jeannine and Roman Fodchuk. Mom and Dad, what you've given our family and this community is a half-decade's opus. Your resilience, your unwavering love, your incomprehensible skill has, without any exaggeration, changed the world. Alongside Bradley's life, we passionately celebrate yours, for without one, the other cannot exist. On behalf of my family, I welcome each of you to today's celebration. And before we get rolling, I want to propose a few ground rules, if you're okay with that. Number one ground rule is there is no one right way to behave, to share, to reflect, to act. Let's commit to sobbing uncontrollably one moment and laughing like loons the next. Ground rule number two, let's connect. If you're a hugger, find your fellow huggers and get after it. If you're more private, shy, or just comfortable with some extra space, your presence is our gift. That each of us is here together resonates more powerfully than any speeches or gestures. And here's ground rule number three. You better not forget this one. Mind your party planner. The day's entire itinerary comes directly and unequivocally from Bradley. If you are of that persuasion, assume that he's watching and taking notes. Brad's spirit electrifies each story, each pierogi bite, and every board game we play today. Through it all, let's savor being together, with one another, and with him. If we're all in agreement around these ground rules, then let's chop up. We have a beautiful program planned. Our time together is grounded in three activities Bradley most enjoyed: telling stories, eating delicious food, and playing games. Let's welcome Brad's lifelong best friend, Derek Luxinger, to share his reflections on some of Bradley's boldest jumps over the course of his lifetime.
All right. So, my name is Derek, and I had the privilege of knowing Brad for around 20 years. My task here is to walk you through some of the main areas of his life and give you a sense of who Brad was. I also end with a couple questions that I asked myself about Brad and my responses to those questions. I hope that through my sharing, we remember what Brad meant to each of us, and we are able to even share more stories together. Comedy. Good comedy exists to push the limits and to make people uncomfortable. So naturally, Brad gravitated towards it. He was my introduction to the wacky world of Monty Python, which happened to be one of his favorite comedy groups. As he got older, so did his tastes. Some of the more on-the-nose routines and comics he enjoyed included Bob's Burgers and, of course, South Park. Brad would constantly be sending me videos and clips of comedy routines he loved. We would be chatting online, and you would hear him start bursting out laughing through his one-of-a-kind laugh. Sometime later, when I was visiting Brad, I noticed that as I got to the front desk, I could hear some music playing that I thought the nurses were listening to. However, as I got closer and closer to Brad's door, I realized that the music was coming from his room. You see, all the machines that were constantly running and making noise had damaged Brad's hearing. It was at this point that I realized I really needed to ask Brad if he had his headphones in before sending him such crude links. He also spoke one of his two famous lines that you would hear from him all the time. "It's fine." The second one I will share with you over drinks. Sports and activities. So Brad loved activities and being engaged with others. He would seek ways to get involved any way he could. Two school sports he particularly enjoyed were floor hockey and soccer. Now, one would think that because his chair is rather bulky, that you would just stick him in the net and be done with it. That would be incorrect. I'll let you in on two strengths he had. One is the rate at which his chair turned. You see, it turned a lot quicker than it could accelerate. Two, his foot pedals were made of metal and they were shin height. He would park himself in front of the net on defense and just smash you. If he was able to get you into the corner, he would cut off the angle and force you into the boards. You had two options. You could either stop or get your shin smashed. He was a menace, and he would be laughing the whole time. In soccer, it was a blast to get him on offense. You could practice with him and try to do give and goes, hitting the ball off his chair. He would park himself in front of the net and just bully that defender. Sometimes we could even get some bank shots off his chair. It was rare, but it was special. When it was outside of school during youth soccer, Brad loved to help Mark coach. He would plan drills and strategies. This would also tie into his love of strategy games and history. He would do anything he could to get involved. He also enjoyed to sing. I remember when I first came to her set, I was too cool to sing. But I saw Brad just giving it, and you know what? I figured out, what else am I going to do here? And really tried to just let go of my embarrassment. Brad's enthusiasm was contagious. School, education, and work. Brad and I didn't line up too much on the school front. We were almost the opposites. I enjoyed the sciences and maths. Brad was more enthused about social and language classes. He had a real passion for writing, art, culture, and history. He liked to analyze stories and try to get in the head of someone from another background and another time. Brad would end up graduating from high school in 2003. From here, he would head off to Red Deer College and start his post-secondary journey. One of the reasons he chose Red Deer was because of its excellent accessibility to campus services, including the choir program he joined. He would start his focus on gaining his bachelor's in history. Also, he would utilize a now-defunct federal program called the Live-in Care Program. This program set Brad up as an employer. He would be responsible for interviewing and screening of foreign workers who were looking to emigrate to Canada. They would get paid, polish their English skills, have a good segue into Canadian culture, and lastly, get a path to citizenship. In exchange, Brad would get a live-in care provider, and in time, a lifelong friend. After 2 years at Red Deer, Brad decided to cheer for the Calgary Flames. Attend the University of Calgary. Again, the main factor of this decision was the campus's excellent facilities for disabled people. Brad continued to stay in Calgary for around 4 years, renting a house near accessible walking trails. In 2016, after much pestering from friends and family, Brad was convinced to move back to Edmonton. This was really hard for him as he was quite comfortable in his routine. Unfortunately, Brad's health deteriorated quickly after this move to Edmonton to the point which not one person could no longer provide care for him. So Brad had to make the very tough decision to relocate to a central care facility called Norwood. Norwood provided excellent care but came with a new set of unique challenges. Not one to back down, this would force Brad to overcome and adapt. No longer would he be the one solely in charge of his schedule or routines. He would learn how to effectively negotiate and trade. Further, leveraging his previous experience, wisdom, and charisma to make sure that not only he was being treated fairly, but other residents were as well. One of his accomplishments at Norwood was the enforcement of no smoking near the entrance. Him and another resident who enjoyed the outside, Jonathan, would ensure that the front entrance was free of cigarette smoke, as many of the residents at Norwood had breathing issues. However, he wanted to ensure that the smokers also had somewhere to enjoy, such as a nice area out back. One of his last pursuits included his spirituality learnings. Guided in part by his mother's beliefs, he found peace in the practice of Buddhism, some of which we'll hear about later today. One of the nurses, Tom, was particularly helpful to Brad. Tom was not only a caregiver, but a good friend, allowing Brad to grow and practice some of his teachings, as well as being a sounding board for discussions and ideas. Brad always kept an open mind and was not afraid to explore and stretch his mind to new concepts. More amazingly, Brad would share without hesitation his wealth of wisdom with others in an effort to grow in communion. Music, poetry, and art. Brad loved to express himself through different arts and music. Brad liked to try his hand at painting and drawing, which was difficult for him to do, but he found it rewarding. I would visit, and he would proudly display his artwork on the walls. His love for music only grew with age. I don't think I encountered a genre of music Brad didn't listen to. Brad was also enamored with poetry and used it to express himself. Regularly, he would ask for input or commentary on his work. Luckily, he found people much more civilized than myself. His poetry will be on display here for you, and I encourage you to check it out. Brad had a real love for expression, and I'm glad he did, as we can get a sense of being and capture his styles from the treasures he left us. Games. Games were a passion of Brad's. It is one of the things that could be universally enjoyed, and barriers do not exist. In games, you can become anything, exist anywhere, and do all. PC games were one of the earliest common interests Brad and I shared. When we weren't mashing fingers, we were flinging dice. We were introduced to the tabletop game of Warhammer 40K, and we would just spend all of our money on these plastic little figures. We were constantly begging Jeannine to drive us around the city and go from mall to mall to look at the game stores. Playing this game with Brad, however, would test your patience. As you know, he can be quite stubborn. He would demand that his troops be lined up exactly 2 inches apart, which was the rule book maximum. Most recently, we would also play a lot of online card games, as Brad's dexterity was fading quite a bit, and he had limited movement of his mouse. He could no longer use a controller or a keyboard or have a lot of range of mouse movement. Oddly enough, Brad's favorite game to play required extreme dexterity, and he had a car that would fly through the air that was strapped to a rocket. In fact, Brad would play this game so much that sometimes I would get mad and upset with him when he would miss the ball. He would respond with that famous line, "It's fine," and everyone would have a chuckle, as I quickly remembered just how much he was accomplishing playing this game. And one of the things we talked about a lot online was how much he loved his nieces and nephews and interacting with them. He just loved listening to their stories and being filled with their wonder. If you're looking for a game to play with a child, I suggest Dixit. Brad introduced myself to this game, and it's an absolute blast to play. And when kids are involved, it is magical. I think that's one of the reasons Brad loved that game so much. I really miss playing games with Brad, and I am saddened when I go to the computer and I see his profile on my friends list, and I am just waiting for it to turn green and for him to log in, and we'll start playing games and cracking jokes and having fun. Brad lives on through everyone he touched with his love of games, and he is truly never gone. All right, so what are some of the hobbies that you may not know Brad had? So Brad loved plants and nature, and he had these little moss terrariums all over his room that he liked to keep. I myself had been keeping an aquarium, and I had given him a link to my camera, and he loved it. So he decided that he wanted an aquarium. So Norwood was gracious enough to let us have a small little 5-gallon aquarium that we set up with plants and little shrimp. He would spend hours watching these little guys run around and munch on things. In my aquarium, I had a pistol shrimp, and it makes a loud popping sound underwater. Brad decided that he wanted one of those. So I had found this nice little electric blue crayfish shrimp at a trade show. And I had convinced Brad, after doing some research, to not get it, but he wasn't having any of it. So we ended up buying that shrimp for Brad. I genuinely tried to talk him out of it. Well, this little guy was a menace. It proceeded to destroy all the work that Brad had accomplished in that aquarium. Brad still loved him, though, as this little creature did look pretty cool. He eventually had to sell the crayfish as he was just making his tank unmanageable. We got his little aquarium fixed up with the help of Jeannine and the nurses at Norwood, who were always so helpful. I'm glad that little piece of nature brought Brad so much comfort. Brad loved food. It's easy to understand why, as food brings us together. It is culturally universal, like music and art, the other things he enjoyed so much. What I couldn't figure out is that this passion really seemed to take off after he got his G-tube installed due to his difficulty swallowing. So the G-tube is a tube that goes in your stomach to feed you, because Brad couldn't swallow anymore. Every time I would call him or visit, he would have the Food Network or some other YouTube cooking channel playing. Jeannine, being the angel that she is, she would drive citywide looking for these ingredients, for these crazy recipes and foods that Brad would be salivating over his keyboard for. She would then spend hours cooking it and bringing it to Brad. The two of them would then enjoy a meal, complete with wine they had smuggled in, and Brad would swish the wine, chew the food, and spit it out. I would ask Brad why he would torture himself with food knowing he can't enjoy it. He would say he doesn't know why, but he supposed it's the simple things that you take for granted that you end up missing most, and maybe he was trying to reclaim some of that. What am I going to miss most about Bradley? I miss having someone who you could say anything to, absolutely anything, and he will not judge, he will not interrupt, he will listen, think, and then respond. I had someone I could openly talk to about politics, current events, share jokes, and not have them get angry, be irrational, or yell. We gave each other community. Now that he's passed, I struggle to keep the same open-mindedness. He was always softer and more compassionate than me, and I will miss his wisdom. What would be Brad's quality or something that inspired you about Brad? The thing that inspired me most about Brad is his strength and resolve. One of the beliefs in Buddhism is that you choose the life you are in now. Therefore, any burden or ailment you may have is within your strengths. This is how Bradley approached life, and he is easily measured by the amount of mountains he climbed rather than the boulders in his way. The expression, "seize the day," was personified in Brad. He was passionate about living in the present. Not once did I hear Brad curse God or hate his existence. Instead, Brad would strive to develop his understanding, knowledge, and friendships. He left nothing on the table and did not dwell on things outside of his control, instead pursuing his goals with unrelenting vigor. I will forever be humbled by his strength. Favorite memory. One time around grade 8 or so, Brad and I were flipping laps around Reset on Main Street. This would have been around lunch break, and we were probably coming back from the gas station towards the high school. Many of us had a bad habit of jumping on the back of Brad's chair and riding him around. Rightfully, Brad hated this, as I imagine it made him feel like an object, and it wrecked his chair. However, he had a hard time of keeping people off of it. I mean, I was an obnoxious teenager. Who was Brad to tell me what I could or couldn't do? Well, today was soon to be my last day doing this. We were cruising, and I decided to pop back on the back of Brad's chair as he was driving. Usually Brad would complain, or he would try to knock people off or do something. This time he didn't, though. A certain movie had just came out that year with an iconic scene of two people standing on the bow of a certain ship. Well, I thought it would be funny to replicate that scene. So, like a young Leo DiCaprio, I had the haircut. I went to the bow of Brad's ship and started cheering at the speed at which we were traveling. I was on this engineering marvel, zipping through the middle of the concrete ocean. I lifted my arms wide and I cheered, "I am king of the world!" Well, no sooner had I done that than the captain ordered a full stop to the engine room. All 24 volts of that raw electric horsepower came to a sudden stop. Brad, being the master tactician, applied his brakes at just the right time. My hands were free, and now my feet were free. I was Icarus, son of Daedalus, flying headlong into the sun. As I flipped over, our eyes locked, and I swear I saw him smile as I devoured my humble pie. I hit the ground with a nice thud, making sure all the little pieces of gravel had impregnated themselves in my skin. Looking up from below, I saw a proud and satisfied Brad. All I could do was laugh, the all too familiar feeling of being outclassed and outwitted at the hands of Brad. That man had bested me again. That was Brad. He had the ability to hold you up and make you soar, or, if your head was in the clouds, melt your wax wings. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know how you follow that. Derek, thank you. Thank you so much for your love and your friendship to Brad and to our family. I mentioned that almost 31 years ago, we were in this same space celebrating our brother Dylan's life. And Dylan's best friend, Billy Woodiak, was so important to our family during, before, and especially after his passing. And I just want to thank Harvey and Lynn for being here today. 31 years after, our families are going to stay connected, and our friendship is going to grow. And that's another example of how Bradley's life and his influence and his teachings are going to keep us together. Thank you. So we're going to hear from another character who might be on her best behavior today. I know of a story, and she might be willing to share it with you later, about yesterday, which was slightly different. But we'll leave that for another time. Shall we, Sarah? Okay. Well, folks, please say hello to Sarah Kaye. And Sarah's going to share some reflections on her relationship with Bradley as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I knew Brad for over 5 years. And in that time, I probably spent more time with him than I did like most of my family, which was probably a good thing now that I think back on it. A few things that I wanted to share was, first of all, that I knew Brad through Norwood. And quickly, it became very apparent that we were not going to have the regular relationship. Brad, as Derek was pointing out, was very set on what he wanted and what he didn't want. And I right away knew that, this is somebody that we're going to need to negotiate with. So I came in with a clipboard, and I was like, okay, how do you want your care done? Let's talk about this. And I sat there with the clipboard, and then I would go back and I would do the reports. And I remember after our first month of knowing each other, he looks at me and he goes, we're gonna fight one day. And I said, probably, yeah. He said, I'm just letting you know that we're probably gonna fight. And 5 years later, we still had never fought. And I brought that up to him. I said, we never actually had that fight we were supposed to have. So, the things that we would talk about was pretty much everything. The amount of times that we would jump from topic to topic. We had this rule that comedy was the one thing that had no boundaries, and we had some very dark comedy that I would probably never share in a crowd such as this. But if you drive me a drink later, no, I'm joking. We also had a lot of things in common regarding music, and he had, like everybody's been saying before, just very diverse tastes in music. He even listened to some Korean boy bands that I recommended for him, to which he proceeded to say, do you know what my YouTube is recommending me now? And I was like... And lastly, of course, poetry. Poetry was the big one. As somebody who loves writing myself and loves the English language and all the ways that we can use it and all the different ways that we can put it together, he would have his poems up and we would just spend hours, honestly, deciding where a comma would go. Like, if you put it before the word, it means but if you put it after, it's like a huh, and that's very important in poetry. So when you guys are looking at the poems, I just want you to know that every single space, every comma, every indentation was deliberately put there by Bradley. If he wanted you to pause, he would put a space. If he wanted you to think about something, he would put an entrance. And if he wanted you to keep going, he would have a run-on sentence. And if he wanted you to be confused, he would write poetry. The one thing that I wanted to share was kind of the impact that Bradley has had on my life. Not only was I able to go into his room as breaks, like I would spend my breaks just hanging out in his room, and whenever I would have a bad day or even not even sleep very well the night before, he would have a row of like comedy videos like lit up just to like make me laugh. And the one time I remember going into his room and he showed me this video, and I wish I could find this video. I wish I could. And it was an animation, and it showed all these people on puppet strings. And they were just going about their life, entering, exiting doors, going into tubs, just going about their lives under puppet strings. And then these giant cartoon scissors come and then cut the strings. And then suddenly the animation bursts into color and the things are dancing and dancing and dancing, and then it dances and then the video ends. And he looks at me and he's like, "What did you think?" And I was like, "I don't know." It was animated very well. Like I didn't know what he was trying to get. And he said, "Do you know what this video means to me?" He said that society puts you on a path from the moment that you're born. You're supposed to do things at a certain time, and if you don't, if you step off these pathways, you're kind of like punished, or you're kind of like looked at sideways. You're supposed to go to school at a certain time. You're supposed to get married at a certain time. You're supposed to do X, Y, and Z, etc., etc. Bradley says, from the moment I was born, my strings were cut. And at first I was kind of floundering, but then I realized, like you see in the animation, once her strings are cut and just bursts into color, that not having the strings means that you can do anything, that you are not set on these paths that society has set for you, and that you can really just do whatever you want. And he was the embodiment of just doing what you want. Like, I don't know if you guys knew, one thing that he mentioned was he was doing wheelchair dancing, and he would actually dance with his wheelchair, and he did so many things that you would probably never think would be possible. But that conversation, that day, the way that he was explaining it to me, that video, everything was so vivid in my mind, because at the time I was going through something where I had to make a decision on which pathway my life was going to go. And my family and my husband at the time were all kind of wanting me to go in one direction, the one that society wants to set for you. And I wanted to go in a different direction. I wanted to go back to school. And hearing what he had said about that video and the strings and being cut and doing what you want had literally changed the entire trajectory of my life, because I went home and I was like, no, I don't want to do what society says I should do at this time. I want to make my own path. I want to cut my strings and do what I want to make myself happy. So I just want you guys all to know that the reason that I'm here today is not just because I love Bradley and I still bug Jeannine every once in a while, but because he has quite literally changed the path of my life and what I've chosen to do. And I would not be where I am now, and I would not be doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for that one day, that one conversation, and that one silly animated video. So I want everybody here who might not have spent as much time complaining to Bradley as I did to recognize that he had the ability, like Derek said, to really listen with such empathy that it would be stunning to you, and to know that he actually genuinely cared about what you were saying, no matter how small and how silly it would be. But he also had the ability to tear you right down in a second if he thought what you were complaining about was ridiculous. And to remind you of things that were important and things that were not important. So thank you all for being here today, and thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah will very soon become a fully certified medical doctor and will continue to help patients and families just like you helped ours. So thank you. At this time, we're going to set aside a short window to invite anyone who is moved to share a brief personal memory of Bradley. Feel free to step forward at this time.
Hi there, I'm Matthew Letourneau. Knew Brad from, well, I think before we were born it was already set up that we were going to be friends. I think others had decided for us, but just want to share a brief memory that he's really impacted my life, having grown up with him, different stages too of my life. Just thinking a time the ones that have been mentioned already are great examples, and I just remember being kind of a shy kid and remembering Brad just had a strength that was really important in helping me understand myself, through life, and even today. So early days was things like, if Shimano, the dog, the husky, would come up to him and was taller than I was, I'd be terrified. And Brad knew that if you just tap into some joy and some happiness, Shimano would be on his best behavior, not in hunting coyote mode, but more cuddling you, and eating some scraps mode. Things like that over time as well too. I have a mind that races like a lot of people, and Brad would, fill his day with activities and ways to kind of enjoy that and seek joy in having, a mind that's quite active. And I think, I've come to appreciate it more over time, but he'd be reading books, whether it was Calvin and Hobbes or, if it was comedy on TV, had the satellite there at the farm, and there was better comedy there in most houses in St. Paul. But whether it was going out in the forest, whether it was, chasing gophers or whatever it was, finding joy, and it's important today because, well, I live in Ottawa now, and I know I'm sorry about that, but there's a lot of people who use their intelligence and their smarts and, want to be seen as a little bit more important than the next fella. But Brad had a way, that got me. I'm just using that to be joyful and, always having a nice moment with everyone around, whether it was over a plate of food or laughing and stuff, never making anyone feel, out of place or always a nice word, and laughter was a big part of that. Laughter just having that huge medicine effect, and he believed in these things, seem simple, but really he committed, whether it was music, as you were saying, Derek, or the dancing thing. I always think that's brilliant, figuring out how am I going to dance, and those strings, and seeing that there's some freedom too in having those strings, but a lot of difficulty. And nowadays, I sue a lot of people who don't take those barriers away, and I just want to acknowledge that, in the Fodchuk household, I recognize that a lot of barriers were taken away, but he also knew that, and he was able to fill his life with joy in others. So I'm grateful. I'm just going to stop there. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I knew Bradley. I'm trying to figure out where to start because I knew Bradley through his mother. And I first met Jeannine, and we'll go 31 years back, through Dylan. I was at Reset at that point, and through, it was peer support or something, Dylan was at home, and his friends, I thought, we'll bring his friends to Jeannine to meet Dylan. And that's how I met Jeannine. And then, of course, Bradley at school. But why I'm here, it's because Dylan didn't live in a bubble. He lived with everybody, as everybody has mentioned. And I'm here to talk about Jeannine, because I got to know Bradley through Jeannine. We became very, very close friends, and I got to know Bradley through Jeannine, and I admired Jeannine so much. I mean, she was the caregiver. She was the one that went to Calgary. She was the one, and when she'd come back, we'd get together and we'd play Scrabble and talk about Bradley. And so it is, although we are celebrating Bradley and Dylan, it is Jeannine that was the strength behind Bradley and Dylan, and it was Roman also together. And it was, and her brothers. And so that's why I'm here to honor the work and the time, the patience that I learned from you and from Bradley. So to Jeannine and Roman and Kyle and Amos.
Good afternoon. My name is Fodchuk. I'm going to take the segue that Amos mentioned about Dylan's 31st, let's say, the anniversary of Dylan's passing 31 years ago. Our older son, Peter, was a very close friend of Dylan's. And I wish he was here, and he would have loved to have been here to speak to you. But he lives in Nanaimo, and again, can't be here. I'm going to be a very meager substitute for him. Now, as a parent, I observed a relationship that Derek talks about with Brad that Peter had with Dylan. And I can remember as a parent watching Dylan, and their two little boys play together. And the visual imagery that this boy had when he was playing with blocks or cranes or whatever was inspiring. And it's sort of funny how life goes. I think every time you get something, you lose something. And maybe at times, if you're not given something, you gain something. So it's really, I think it's inspiring and heartwarming to hear the stories, and I say we're all enriched by the disabilities that Brad and Dylan had, and I think it just behooves us to take the time to experience that in each other and our friends and neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing and for just continuing to unfold this story that we're a part of, and that Bradley is connecting us through today, as much as he has in every day before this one. As many of you know, Bradley found rich meaning and strength as a practicing Buddhist. Rod Walker and Dan Broadrib join us today. Rod, Dan, you're with the Edmonton Buddhist Meditation Group, and you've come out to St. Paul today to share some reflections on Brad's involvement in your community, and we really appreciate you coming. And so we'd love for you to spend a little time sharing your reflections on Bradley's contributions.
Well, I would like to thank Jeannine and Roman for inviting us. It was really a neat thing. I hadn't known of Brad's passing until very recently. Dan and I are members of the Edmonton Buddhist Meditation Group. Now, Brad found our group in November of 2017 and didn't start meeting actually with us. He found it on Facebook, and he didn't meet with us until 2018. I was asked to come to the Norwood Center and give him some instruction. I chuckle at that right now. Yeah. He had known a group in Calgary and we didn't know what kind of instruction or what experience he had there, so I figured I would give him some instruction and help him on. This is what I told him. I said, find yourself a comfortable seat. Get comfortable, and then simply be still. Watch what's happening in your mind. Watch the thoughts that come and let them go. Again, be still until another thought comes, and then let it go. Okay, sorry. Brad took that in, and after a couple times sitting, I realized that I wasn't the teacher, that Brad was the teacher, right? His stillness was, I don't know if he'd picked something up or somebody had told him something in Calgary, but obviously he had this ability to stay really still. And you could tell because his breathing would slow right down, right? So, we started meditating on like a Wednesday night, and that worked really well for a while. And later Saturdays were more important. We could travel out, we'd go outside to the picnic area or to an open area, or if the weather was bad or it just didn't feel right, we would go down this long hall to an interfaith room where we'd meditate. Now, let me just find out where I'm at again. Right. So we did this for 2 years. Every week, we would meet for half an hour, and we would be really still. We wouldn't talk, so I never knew anything about Brad until today. This is a revelation, but you know, we never talked about anything. We never talked about games or politics or food or anything. We just sat and had a very still mind for 30 minutes. So I'm really encouraged, and I really appreciate learning more about this unique human being. So occasionally, masters, teachers in our order would come up from BC and be with us on the Wednesday night or Saturday. And one of the masters, Reverend Master Coten Benson, mentioned that he was inspired by Brad, by how he lived. And this is a senior master in the order. So it was quite we actually had a discussion about being serene, about being still, you know, and Reverend Master used Brad as an example. His meeting with Brad. There are called the four wisdoms: charity, benevolence, tenderness, and sympathy. And Brad exhibited those wisdoms, and Brad was wise. I once asked Brad if he ever got mad or angry. And he said that if he saw a worker neglect or mistreat somebody at the center, that he would become an advocate for that patient. He didn't kind of want to fight. He wanted to fix, he wanted to repair, to help. And that was really impressive. Now, one of the things that Brad would have liked for us to do today would be to experience the kind of meditation that he did, right? And so, I would ask you to find yourself, and for 2 minutes, we will do a short meditation. So get yourself comfortable, just so that just get comfortable. And for 2 minutes, watch what's happening, be still. You can close your eyes or keep them open if you wish. But let's be still and let the thoughts come and let them go. Just keep letting them go. Thank you. I celebrate Brad's life. He's been an example to me that whatever your burden, you can still be gentle, joyful, and aware. I am truly grateful to Brad for demonstrating to me his acceptance of his situation with stillness and good humor. Seldom do you meet someone once a week for 30 minutes and say nothing to one another, just sitting still. And after a couple of years, that person has a profound effect on your life. Think about that. You need to say nothing, you just need to be with the person, and you need to be letting thoughts go. His example of always being gentle, joyful, and aware will be with me for the rest of my life. Thanks, Brad.
Rod, you yourself are a gentleman, and so the compliment that you pay Bradley coming from you resonates. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Dan, for coming to be with us today, and for welcoming Bradley into your community, and for being so amenable to continuing to connect with him through technology. The last 3 years have been very difficult for everyone, not the least of which has been Bradley. Kyle, get up here. I'm pausing for dramatic effect. Brother, let's read some poetry here, okay?
Let's do that.
The microphone is yours.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you very much. Okay, before I start with the poem, just as a segue from the meditation, Mum had just shared us one of Bradley's mantras, just in what he had practiced daily, and he would say to himself for 2 minutes and recite that to just kind of balance or take the day on, and it was a very moving mantra for me, and I thought I want to share it with everybody. I think I remember it. It starts with, I become a wise, graceful, and compassionate, smiling spiritual warrior who faces and relieves suffering. Say that 2 minutes. Okay, for 2 minutes? No. Louder? Can everybody hear me? Okay. I become a wise, graceful, and compassionate, smiling, spiritual warrior who faces and relieves suffering. I don't know if there were any commas in there, so I can't speak to the spaces and the commas. Okay, now, as Derek had mentioned, Bradley is a bit of a poet. He even branded himself as B Poet. And he has a variety of different poetry displayed here, and we are reading one that is quite appropriate for today. And it's titled Ode from the Dead. Grieve. I'm not here. You are. You feel it in your chest. You feel an endless ache. You feel what you need to. You spent your time with me where you could, and it's our goodbye. Evoke memories of me. Let it be your joy. My smile, my laugh, my presence. Feel me beside you in the sun. Close your eyes. Remember. Our memories are left. Smile. Please don't forget, the scythe follows through. You will be memories too. I want you to take joy from each moment. It's the one lesson I can give. Don't deny it to me. It comes to you. It comes to you. I want you to use me. All that matters is forgotten moments of today. The falling leaves, the radiating sun, the falling snow, the loving chat, the falling rain, the blooming color, the growing of creation. Nothing more sublime.
Man, if you listen to all these stories and you didn't know Brad, you must think this kid's amazing. A perfect human being, right? There's some irony in Brad's masterful control over silence. If you knew him, you knew that this person talked and could out-talk anyone. So I find how you can be good at one thing and be equally good at another. And like Bradley, I talk for a living, and I've learned a few things in my travels, just like Brad has, although not nearly as much. There is one rule that I never violate, and that is this: do not stand in the way of hungry people and their imminent meal. You will lose every time. And so, in just a few short minutes, our ceremony will wrap, and we'll find our way into a more communal setting of game playing and visiting and sharing of a meal. So I'll share just a few final words, and I'll leave you with a very brief pearl of wisdom from a second soul that we lost too soon. The lead singer of the band Tragically Hip, Gord Downey. Tragically Hip was a band that Brad enjoyed listening to, and that we would talk about lyrics for a long time. And there was one song that Brad and I knew called Daredevil. And in this song, Gord tells the story of a man who willfully seals himself into a wooden barrel. And to the amazement of the paying public, standing on the banks of Niagara Falls, he careens over the edge in this wooden barrel, yanked by gravity into the churning waters an impossible distance below. And for almost the entire song, the listener, we're inside the barrel and inside this daredevil's mind. What compels him to jump over the falls, to stare unblinking at his possible death, and to commit to jumping again and again? It's only in the final two lines of that song when Mr. Downey transports us out of this wooden barrel and drops us back into the corners of our own minds. He and the band begin to fade out, leaving us with a reflection that's impossible to ignore. These are the last two lines of the song Daredevil. And the real wonder of the world is that we don't jump too. I'll repeat that. And the real wonder of the world is that we don't jump too. Friends, take comfort and inspiration on your own journeys, knowing that Bradley the Daredevil hops and skips alongside each of us, today and every day thereafter. Before we finish the formal part of Brad's celebration, we would like to highlight some of the hall's decorations. Throughout the hall, you'll find different tables and activities that Bradley enjoyed sharing countless hours with his friends and family. We would love to have another full opportunity to play these activities and interact with them as we think about Bradley this afternoon. There are displays with Brad's poems, art, and his influences. Brad also spent countless hours curating and enjoying music from all genres. Ansel is behind there playing DJ, and we thank him for assembling those tracks. The overhead projector contains countless pictures of memories and the life Brad shared with his friends and family. We hope these trigger memories that will last with you for a long time. There's a board game table that contains some of the classics that Brad enjoyed. These are light, fun, and quick games that people can watch or participate with anyone who would like to play. If board games aren't your speed, maybe some Nintendo Switch is more your style. The food table is the jewel of the Garlic Dome, and Brad would be proud of the food we are about to enjoy. Mr. and Mrs. Jeannine and your staff, thank you so much for preparing such a beautiful meal. We're very grateful for everything that you're giving us today and for the decades that you've served our community. Thank you on behalf of the family for defining Brad and giving him the inspiration, the meaning, and the friendship that made him smile every day. He is at peace because of the love, time, and care he received from everyone here and beyond. Thank you, everyone.